saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion passes. So October 22. Then, moving on, okay, we got that. Is there any other unusual business that I'm not aware of that we need to discuss this evening? Okay, hearing none. Then, I will entertain a motion, I would entertain a motion to find that discussion of a pending civil litigation would put the municipality at a substantial disadvantage if it will be discussed prematurely in public.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor of finding that it would put the municipality at a disadvantage, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion passes. Therefore, I'll entertain a motion to enter executive session under 1 VSA 313 A1E to discuss pending civil litigation.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of entering executive session signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion passes. So we'll go into executive session at 7:45. We should be back probably within 5-10 minutes. Back into session at 6:52. We were incorrect on when we went out. We went out at 6:45. We're coming back in at 6:52. And I would entertain a motion for a resolution of the executive session.
I would move that we direct the chair to contact the town's attorney to respond to the complaint of unpaid wages filed with the Department of Labor.
Second.
Is there any further discussion on that? Hearing none, all those in favor of instructing the chair to contact the attorney to respond to the complaint signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? The motion passes. Okay, so the next meeting is going to be on November 12th. And we do have BDCC coming in to speak about the program at that particular meeting. If there's nothing else, then I would entertain a motion to move into executive session under 1 VSA 313A3 to begin employee evaluations.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor of moving into executive session to discuss evaluations, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion passes. Okay. That's it.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
We have a packed day of news today, so I'm particularly glad that you're with me, and I'll get right into it. We have a major story to start with today. It's really one of the biggest stories of the year. In the world of social media and online marketing, the issue of political ads and terms of service has become a really huge issue, and it relates to politics so closely. And Twitter has decided to ban all political advertising from its platform. The Twitter CEO, Jack Dorsey, says that advertisers are getting an unfair advantage in sending out misleading and inaccurate messages, and that Twitter is going to stop all political ads, period. This was announced on Twitter in a multi-tweet thread by Jack Dorsey, where he said, quote, "We've made the decision to stop all political advertising on Twitter globally. We believe political message reach should be earned, not bought. Of course, there are some claiming this is a form of suppression of speech, and it's not." And Jack Dorsey says this in a subsequent tweet in this thread. Quote, "A final note, this isn't about free expression. This is about paying for reach, and paying to increase the reach of political speech has significant ramifications that today's democratic infrastructure may not be prepared to handle. It's worth stepping back in order to address." Now, interestingly, he says at first they thought maybe we'll ban ads just by political candidates promoting a candidate in a particular election. But then they correctly realized that lots of what is going on that is really political advertising is PACs that may be supporting a candidate, which is sort of like one level removed from the candidate. And then you're getting to issue-based stuff that is clearly political, but wouldn't be stopped if you simply say no ads for candidates. So they're banning all of it, although we have to figure out what the implementation will be. So let's talk about that first. But then, I really want to talk about the implications and the context in which this is taking place. So implementation. This starts on November 22nd. That's about 3 weeks from now. How will they decide if an ad is political in nature? Because so many things are political to some degree. Is an ad about keeping our national parks clean from pollution and trash in the context of the climate crisis? Is that political? Who gets to decide? I don't know the answers to these questions. It's going to need to be sorted out. And I'm guessing that on some level, Twitter will come up with some rubric for determining what it is that counts as political. And there may well be some disagreement about what that is. The big thing here is that this is very clearly a shot across the bow at Facebook and at Mark Zuckerberg. You might remember, and we covered it, that Mark Zuckerberg testified before the House last week. It went really poorly for him. I played the clips of Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez asking him questions that he wasn't even remotely able to answer in a satisfactory way. Her mistake was interrupting his answers. I think that is not the right look. You gain nothing by interrupting Mark Zuckerberg. If anything, you bail him out from fully being able to expose that he doesn't know a lot of these answers. That's my one critique of AOC in that. But mostly it was Zuckerberg who was visibly confused, not just about what Facebook policies should be from a moral, ethical, or legal standpoint, but he even seemed confused about what Facebook policies are. And what is clear is that Facebook and Twitter are going to be taking drastically different approaches to this issue of political advertising and what is involved. Facebook is taking the ad money, and they are going to make some sort of little restrictions around the edges to try to protect some semblance of responsibility that they want to claim to have about what they will allow. Mark Zuckerberg talking about examples of, you can't target black voters. I think he said you can't target black voters or predominantly black zip codes with an ad that misstates when election day is. That would be a form of voter suppression. But the line between that and just a generally dishonest ad is a blurry line. It became very clear that it was blurry when Mark Zuckerberg testified. Twitter is doing something very different. They're cutting this off at the pass. They're saying no political ads, period. Now, Jack Dorsey doesn't mention Mark Zuckerberg specifically in his tweets, but he does say, for example, that, quote, "We have witnessed many social movements reach massive scale without any political advertising." What he is responding to is Zuckerberg saying, if we tighten our policies on this, we'll disproportionately hurt grassroots groups, will disproportionately hurt challengers in politics, and we will be propping up the status quo. That was Mark Zuckerberg's argument. Clearly, Jack Dorsey saying he doesn't agree with that when he says, we've seen movements succeed even without paid political advertising. So I have a few thoughts on this. First of all, remember, politicians, billionaire tech CEOs, these are not heroic actors. We shouldn't idolize them. Jack Dorsey made a decision that could be the correct moral decision, but there is no question that part of it was a calculation based on the PR of it, based on the timing of last week's Facebook fiasco in front of Congress. So number one, let's not focus our interpretation on the morality of ethics or ethics of the decision, even if on the merits it is the right decision, and it may well be. Secondly, I have to tell you, I know political ads are big on Twitter. In my experience, the problem isn't so much the political ads, which I see very few of and can say I don't want to see stuff like this. I don't know if that's because of how I browse Twitter. For me, the real problem, the real battle lines are the terms of service and enforcement of those terms of service for users. For me, this has always been really the issue on Twitter. I like the decision that was made about banning political ads. That's a decision Twitter can make, and they can say, we're just not going to have that on our platform. Our platform will not allow political issues or candidates to buy influence. They're going to have to earn it. But what about high-profile people who are allowed to completely flout the terms of service? For example, like Donald Trump himself. What about the totally soft way in which Twitter has dealt with criticism about the political nature of its terms of service from both left and right, sometimes rightly, sometimes in a completely ridiculous way, without adjudicating right now as a particular terms of service decision as right or wrong? Twitter needs to deal with their terms of service enforcement in a serious and credible way. And I hope that they do, although this might be a really PR-friendly thing to do, banning political ads, instead of dealing with the mess of their terms of service and more specifically their enforcement. One last thought on this. Even if you ban political ads in the formal sense where a candidate can run a paid campaign, there are still ways around this. Candidates or issue-based organizations or PACs, they can still pay for retweets and tweets. There are a whole bunch of ways that you can still effectively buy reach on Twitter, even if it is strictly speaking banned. That is a bigger conversation, and we'll see if ultimately Twitter comments about that. We have big news, maybe, in the case of the death of Trump friend and sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein, who died under what I admit are strange and unusual circumstances while in jail awaiting trial, in what was called a suicide, but quite frankly, it sounded odd from day one, even without jumping into any particular conspiracy theory. The New York chief medical examiner ruled the death a suicide by hanging back in August. There is this well-known forensic pathologist named Michael Baden, who's been appearing on television for decades. I remember watching him on Larry King when I was a kid in the late 90s. And he was interviewed by the folks over at Fox and Friends, and he says the evidence that he has reviewed is more indicative of homicide than suicide. Now, I want to look at pieces of this because while I agree that there are weird things about the Epstein death, I'm going to be totally transparent with you. I'm not fully in on the conspiracy theory side. I'm not fully in on the official story makes sense to me. I don't know what happened, but I want us to be savvy and critical consumers of any assertion that we see in the media. And there is a lot of stuff here that, if you actually pick it apart, doesn't make a lot of sense. So let's start with the first segment from Fox and Friends.
Well, I was asked by the brother, the next of kin, to be at the autopsy. And at the autopsy on day one, there were findings that were unusual for suicidal hanging and more consistent with ligature homicidal strangulation, which included...
And it was suggested at the time that he committed suicide by doing what?
By hanging. At the time he was found allegedly hanging by a homemade ligature of sheets.
Are you saying you don't think it was suicide?
I think that the evidence points toward homicide rather than suicide.
Why?
Because there are multiple 3 fractures in the hyoid bone, the thyroid cartilage, that are very unusual for suicide and more indicative of strangulation, homicidal strangulation.
So Baden says that the autopsy he observed, it was inconclusive whether it was homicide or suicide initially, and then it was later changed, and it's unclear why. And that's a lot of the focus here, but that's not really evidence of anything, and it's important to understand that. Also, a lot of the framing of this interview is off. Brian Kilmeade frames this like Baden is like working a charity case here. He says, how did you learn the family needed your help? It's important to understand that Michael Baden was hired by Jeffrey Epstein's brother. He's in the employ of Jeffrey Epstein. This is not a charity case. And your entire understanding of what Michael Baden says is different if you see him as the Good Samaritan with decades of expertise showing up to help out someone in need versus he's involved because he was hired for money, presumably, as far as we would be led to assume, by one of the parties that is involved. You have to take that into account. Let's continue.
So you're saying when you left the examination room, they weren't sure what happened.
That's right.
So what, you know this procedure, what happened in the interim to get this such a blunt conclusion?
Well, a week later, it was changed to homicide. The brother wants to know what did they get new in that week to make it homicide.
What's your answer to that?
We don't know. We don't know. It's 80 days now.
Right.
And the brother feels he's getting a runaround. And to add to it, there was a total breakdown in security. The video cameras didn't work. The guards went to sleep.
Okay, and then so this is sort of a key thing. These broken bones are much at issue, and later he's asked if he's ever seen fractured bones in the hyoid or thyroid. I think with the thyroid, it's called something else, maybe a fracture or a damage to it, in a self-inflicted hanging death.
How hard is it to commit suicide in prison?
Very easy. But first, in this situation, if he took the sheets and stripped it and made it, would have taken a good half hour or hour to make the ligature, then to go up there. Once you're hanging, it's about 5 minutes or so that you can be near dead.
Dr. Bodden, though, if the supposition is that it was a homicide, that would mean cops were in on it. Who opened the door, who moved the cameras, all of that stuff.
Was it someone on the outside, or was it an inside job?
That's
right.
That's a terrible allegation.
Why were the two guards asleep? In 50 years of looking at deaths in New York State, and occasionally a guard falls asleep. Never are two guards at the same time. The cell, the camera in the cell watching didn't work. The camera in the hallway to see if anybody came in and out of his cell didn't work. This is bizarre. That his roommate was taken away, so he's all by himself. Suicide watch was taken away. So yeah, the issue you bring up has to be investigated. Doesn't mean that this was a homicide, but certainly it deserves investigation. And the brother's concerned there is no investigation.
Have you ever seen anyone that committed suicide and was hanging themselves with those 3 broken bones?
No. Hanging does not cause these broken bones, and homicide does. Usually two bones, even 3, is a huge amount of pressure was applied.
So listen, I don't know what to think, okay? If we step back for a second, Michael Bodden was hired by Epstein's brother, so that has to be taken into account here. Fox and Friends then has a further interest in perpetuating the most sensational and salacious possible version of the story. But at the same time, even people in our audience who are not prone to conspiratorial thinking email me every few days and say, David, something here doesn't seem right. There are too many coincidences. He was on suicide watch and then taken off. And then the cameras go down and the guards fall asleep and he ends up with broken bones that never get broken in a hanging suicide. But, and this is what we all should be doing, you've got to start looking at these claims one by one. Because a lot of times, without taking a side, I want to be clear, I don't know what happened. A lot of times when you hear all these facts together, it's like, wow, yeah, that clearly something else happened. But you got to break them down one by one. An example, Bodden says part of the suspicious thing is he was on suicide watch and then he was taken off of it. That's not really a part of the story. His own lawyers, Epstein's own lawyers, asked for him to be removed from suicide watch. Conditions are not as good in suicide watch when you are on suicide watch at this particular facility. So that's not really part of what we're looking at. His own lawyers said take him off of suicide watch. Then there's the claim. He says, I've never seen those bones broken in a suicide. Well, hold on a second. I did a very quick Googling and found a study called, and there's many of these, Fractures of the Hyoid Bone and Thyroid Cartilage in Suicidal Hanging, which says that in this study, in 25% of the cases reviewed, there were fractures of the hyoid bone in known hanging suicides. So when Michael Bodden says, I've never seen this, well, here's a study that says it happens a quarter of the time. It's not proof of anything. But again, when he says he's never seen it, and that feels overwhelming to us, and then we say, well, hold on. Here's an actual peer-reviewed study which says it's not that rare. This one says it's happened in a quarter of the times. There are other studies which say it's even more common that you see fractures of the hyoid bone, even in a suicidal hanging. So I don't know what happened. I'm not purporting to tell you what happened. I have an open mind, and a lot of this does seem weird, and on motive, there are lots of people who would want Epstein dead. All I'm saying is, when you hear the bullet points rattled off, camera, broken bones, suicide watch, it sounds overwhelming and uncontestable. But when you start breaking it down and looking at each piece one by one, a lot of these things can be crossed off. They can be crossed off as proof or disproof. They sort of become not particularly relevant factors. And then you maybe can get a more sober and sensible assessment of what went on. We may still never know what ultimately happened, but it's important to take every single assertion with the same skepticism that I hope I have inspired people to have about any messages we hear in media, including those you hear here on The David Pakman Show. Let me know what you think. I'm on Twitter @dpakman, and the show is on Twitter @David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The David Pakman Show isn't some corporate media show with huge advertisers and a media conglomerate supporting us. We actually depend on support from our viewers and listeners. The easiest way, the most rewarding way, the most exciting way to support the show is to get a membership at www.joinpakman.com. You'll receive the world-famous daily bonus show for supporters only, the commercial-free audio and video streams of the show every day, and you'll be part of the solution. Because of membership, we are independent and we're able to cover whatever stories we want, whatever stories our audience is interested in, without executives looking over our shoulder. And it's why we've grown from a weekly show to a daily show. Much to the dismay of the Hatriots, we can't be pulled off the air unless all of you cancel your memberships. Please don't do that, but please do sign up today at www.joinpakman.com. Support independent progressive media. Whether you're looking for David Pakman Show coffee for your Chemex or French press, or a David Pakman Show t-shirt, it's all available on our website, shipping to anywhere in the world at davidpakman.com/gear. Don't miss the bumper stickers too. davidpakman.com/gear.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new members of the day are Alicia Wilson and Alexander Dolesi. Thank you for your subscriptions. I do want to let everybody know I did receive a bunch of emails yesterday from folks saying, David, I was trying to sign up and the website wasn't working. It would either hang or it wouldn't allow me to even type in my credit or debit card number. I apologize. There was an issue with our website yesterday related to caching. I won't get into the details of it because I only even somewhat understand them. But needless to say, it's been fixed. If you tried to sign up yesterday and couldn't, please do come back. I also want to say thanks to David Butler, who is today's longtime sustaining member of the day. David's been with us for almost 5 years. JoinPakman.com is the place to do it. Coupon code. I don't usually mention this one, but I'm telling you today. HALF19, HALF19, will save you 50% off of the membership of your choice. Give it a shot. Give it a shot. It's a doozy. Okay, let's go to some notable discussions from the David Pakman Show subreddit, which you can, of course, find at davidpakman.com/Reddit, now boasting nearly 16,000 subscribers from our online, radio, television, and satellite television audiences. Last week, some notable discussions I want to go over. Last week, I did a story about the divisions on the left. And there was a faction of the left that I said, you know, sometimes I call this the Leninist left. Sometimes they are called tankies, but I find those terms pejorative. I would like to have some other way to refer to this group. And there's a post on our subreddit which says, David, you should call the Leninist left tankies. It's not bad to be confrontational to ignorant people. Tankies are not just people who espouse far-left views. They are people who hate the West and like Russia, China, Iran, North Korea over the U.S. and European Union. These people support Tulsi Gabbard because of her isolationist stances and even make false claims that she is anti-Israel. Okay, so listen, I think that there's a case to be made that the term may not be an inaccurate one to call some of these folks tankies or Leninist left. My point is, I don't think it's productive because the term is pejorative. And I got a bunch of emails about this, and the consensus was I should be calling that wing of the left the revolutionary left or the Marxist left. Now, Marxist left I'm unsure of because I don't know that the entire Leninist left is literally Marxists. They're also not literally Leninists, so maybe it doesn't matter if the term literally applies to everyone. Revolutionary left may actually be a good term to non-pejoratively describe that slice of the left. Let me know what you think. Also, much follow-up about the discussion we had earlier this week about debates with Charlie Kirk, the right-wing bomb thrower from Turning Point USA, as well as my absence at Politicon. This user says David needs to do a public debate despite the WWE pro wrestling vibes. I just watched the Politicon debate between Kyle Kalinske and Charlie Kirk, and it was frustrating. Both of them got applause when they made points. I felt Kyle was correct on substance, but he lost. He let Kirk gish gallop a lot and could have used more of his time to make his case, even though he did a great job of demonstrating his consistent principles and criticizing policies of both parties. He lost his cool way too often, almost to the point of coming across as whiny. I don't know if David has experience with these kinds of debates, but he's very much in control of everything when he has guests on who disagree with him. Yeah, listen, I am flattered by people saying, David, you would have done way better than Kyle in this scenario. I really don't know that that's the case, and I'm not playing faux humble. I mean, those types of situations can go any number of ways. When the crowd gets involved, when the moderator plays or doesn't play a particular role, it's not clear to me. What I feel very strongly about is that this is not a format overall in terms of the timing, structure, role of the moderator, and role of the audience that leads to actual productive discussions. Counterpoint, we are right now producing a 4-interview series with this guy, Yaron Brook from the Ayn Rand Institute. I'm not a Randian, as many of you know. I'm not a libertarian or any of this stuff. I disagree with Yaron Brook on almost everything. But we have set these up so that they will be 4 30 to 40-minute conversations, each with a specific topic, no interrupting, where we can actually give our views and argue against the other's views. I think that is going to be a format that much better will serve learning and figuring out which ideas reign supreme, for lack of a better term, and a reference, of course, to Iron Chef. So that's where I'll sort of leave it. Make sure you are subscribed to the David Pakman Show subreddit. It's free, and more than 15,000 of you have already done it. davidpakman.com/REDDIT. So the week has turned really bad for Donald Trump. On top of being booed at the World Series game, on top of getting bad GDP numbers by his own standards, which I'll talk about later, despite the formalization of an impeachment inquiry against him starting to move forward in the House, despite being caught staging a Situation Room picture 90 minutes after the raid that led to the death of ISIS leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi had ended, there was devastating testimony given against Donald Trump by witnesses, including testimony that mentions that there was a concerted effort to remove references to Joe Biden and the company Burisma in that, quote, transcript of Trump's July 25 phone call with the Ukrainian President Zelensky. We're covering that piece separately, so I'm not going to get into detail about it now. But needless to say, it has thrown Donald Trump into one of his tizzies, this time forcing him to burp out a series of panicked anti-impeachment rants, riddled with misspellings and all. This guy knows he's in trouble. See if you can make heads or tails out of this. Trump tweeting, Republicans are very unified and energized in our fight on the impeachment hoax with the do-nothing Democrats, and now are starting to go after the substance even more than the very unfair process, not unfair, the unfair process, because just a casual reading of the transcript leads everybody to see that the call with the Ukrainian president was a totally appropriate one. As he said, no pressure. This impeachment nonsense is just a continuation of the witch hunt hoax, which has been going on since before I even got elected. Republicans, go with substance and close it out. So understand, he's panicking because everything is happening as it should, and it's really bad for him. Nancy Pelosi and Democrats are formalizing the impeachment inquiry. They're giving him the due process that he claims to have been denied. Witnesses are coming forward and saying what they say, like, for example, Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman, which we'll get to. So when you look at the substance of what Trump is tweeting, it makes no sense. The process is not unfair or unfair, as Trump says. It's the same process that took place with Bill Clinton. The transcripts lead everyone to see the Ukraine call as appropriate, he claims. Well, you didn't release a transcript. You released some truncated nonsense. And even in and of itself, it was incriminating. Now it is being alleged that specific mentions of Joe Biden were removed from what you released. His continued references to that summary as a transcript, this has become one of the most frequently repeated misleading memes about this entire fiasco that he's made, that it's a witch hunt. I mean, he says that about everything. Of course, that's not true. So let's go back to the basics. Is this how an innocent person truly behaves? But as I've been saying for months, if you think that this is Trump starting to lose it, just wait if and until the public hearings begin. It will be a completely new Donald Trump altogether. The rants, the tweets, the erratic behavior, the attempts to cover up. It's going to get really, really bad. And a little bit later, I'll come back to the testimony from Alexander Vindman. Something seems to really have Republicans in a highly triggerable state lately. Last week, or maybe it was the week before, they stormed into an impeachment-related meeting claiming that they wanted access to impeachment stuff that was happening secretly in the basement of some building with only Democrats. Of course, we later found out that many of the same Republicans that stormed in demanding access have access to impeachment documents and to witnesses, since many of those Republicans are on the committees that are involved in the impeachment inquiry. Yesterday, instead of storming in, they stormed out. Doesn't matter, they just want to be storming around. This time storming out of a Veterans Affairs Committee meeting, refusing to vote on a health care bill for women veterans. What is wrong with these people? This is how it went. The House Veterans Affairs Committee was meeting about a bill for women veterans health care, to get them health care. Republicans did what they often do, and sometimes Democrats do this too. They suggest a variety of amendments, which Democrats rightly identified as poison pill amendments. California Democrat Mark Takano stopped the debate on these proposed amendments because, as he says, these are toxic partisan amendments. They wouldn't actually improve health care for women veterans, which was the point of the discussion that we're having about this bill. The Republicans became irate. How dare you accuse us of that? And then a whole bunch of them stormed out, and it was filmed. Take a look.
Substitute voting now occurs on agreement to Congresswoman Brown this amendment to substitute. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair.
Now, it's true. The amendments they were proposing had no place in this discussion whatsoever. To bill about women veterans' health care, they were proposing amendments related to veterans' firearms rights, for child care. These are fine things to discuss and debate and to legislate, but this is a bill about women veterans' health care, and this is a really common thing in American politics. Amendments that are unrelated are introduced. Sometimes the point is to get things passed as amendments that you couldn't possibly get passed as standalone bills. That's one reason for these crazy amendments. The other reason sometimes crazy amendments are proposed is to prevent the bill in total from passing by suggesting crazy and unrelated things. The good news here is that the bill, called the Deborah Sampson Act, was passed by the committee. Even without Republicans voting on it, they had the votes, and now it will go to a full vote in the House. I don't really believe in stuff like karma, but if there are just desserts in our world, Republicans would deserve to be kicked out of office in 2020 by the people that they have so endlessly screwed over. I'm talking about veterans. I'm talking about farmers. I mean, in a sense, I'm talking about most groups in general, no matter how you slice or dice it, now that I think about it. But this is another example of Republicans love the military when it's useful and politically advantageous. If it's about supporting some harebrained intervention in some part of the world, let's support the troops and not say that the mission they're on is not a good one. And then when it's not so useful, when it comes to providing them health care, when it comes to former members of the military who might have something to say that's negative about Donald Trump, like Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman, all of a sudden, all of that pro-military stuff evaporates very, very quickly. This has come up so many times recently on the show because recently it's been particularly prevalent and extraordinarily brazen. They don't really care about the troops in the real way that they should, making sure that they are properly cared for when they come back from engagements abroad. All of the other things that we've been talking about. This is yet another one of those instances. Vote on the bill. Get the women veterans health care. No, we need amendments about gun ownership. Give me a break. Make sure you're following The David Pakman Show on Instagram at David Pakman Show, and follow me on Instagram at david.pakman.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The David Pakman Show is audience-supported media. I really mean that, not just a catchphrase. And much of that support is small contributions on Patreon, contributions as small as $1 per month, meaning just cents for each hour-long episode of the show. Plus, patrons can also get the daily bonus show and the daily commercial-free TV show by pledging at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. We've rolled out great new perks on Patreon, including free bumper stickers, t-shirts, coffee mugs, and more at different giving levels, as well as exclusive content. And it all comes with the pleasure of knowing you're supporting independent progressive media, an alternative to the corporate stuff that is as much a part of the problem as our political system. If you value the show and have as little as $1 to put towards independent media, check out patreon.com/David Pakman Show and make a pledge today. It'll feel good, and I'd really appreciate it. Patreon.com/David Pakman Show. Did you know the David Pakman Show is on all sorts of different platforms? Find us on YouTube at youtube.com/The David Pakman Show, and on Steemit, the blockchain-based publishing platform, at steemit.com/@David Pakman. That's STEEMIT.com/@David Pakman.
Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Okay, this next story is simultaneously major breaking news and completely obvious and unsurprising to anybody who's been paying attention. Yesterday, Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman testified before Trump impeachment investigators. Vindman is this National Security Council top Ukraine expert that has been embroiled in the Ukraine fiasco of Donald Trump and that July 25 phone call. And he testified that references to Joe Biden were removed proactively from the so-called transcript of that phone call between Donald Trump and the Ukrainian President Zelensky. This is a major claim. This is massively important on a substantive level, but it is also exactly what any sensible person thought was going on from the second Trump said they were going to be releasing a transcript. Trump called it a word-for-word transcript, but what the White House released from the July 25 phone call was a sampling of things that were reportedly said. Remember, it was a 30-minute phone call. There were about 6 or 7 minutes of conversation that were included in what the Trump White House released. Even if you assume that that was doubled in how much time it took up because of live translation back and forth for Trump and Zelensky, there is still obviously a lot missing from that phone call. We knew this the second we looked at the so-called transcript. And now Lieutenant Colonel Vindman says this is what went down. Vindman says he tried to change the transcript to include Trump telling Zelensky that there are Biden tapes, for example. That was allegedly one of those mysterious ellipses that I pointed out in the transcript, which we believe represent removed parts of the conversation. The White House claims, those ellipses don't mean that. Of course, it was not added in, as we know, despite Vindman's insistence. Vindman wanted the transcript edited to show that Burisma was mentioned, the company that hired Hunter Biden. He claims it was mentioned during the call. No can do. Not putting that in the transcript we're releasing either. So let's be clear. Is this the smoking gun? It's not. It's not. And you have Democrats and Republicans and Vindman all saying, listen, the general tenor of the transcript, which was really a summary, is mostly accurate. But the important point is when the subject is what was said about Joe Biden and Hunter Biden, and there are allegations that a reference to Biden and a reference to the company Hunter Biden was working for were removed, it is one of many red flags in this entire thing. It's also another analogy to the impeachment inquiry against President Richard Nixon during the 1970s, which ultimately led to his resignation. Harvard law professor Lawrence Tribe mentioned the Nixon tapes and Nixon's effort to hide the most incriminating parts of those tapes. And you may know this, you may recall if you were around at the time or you may have read about it, there was a very controversial 18-and-a-half-minute gap that was found in one of the Nixon tapes. Eventually, Nixon's personal secretary took responsibility for that missing part, saying she accidentally deleted it. And that was not a claim that everybody believed, to put it lightly. The Trump ellipses or the truncation of the transcript, that may end up being equivalent to Richard Nixon's missing 18 and a half minutes. And it is yet another small way in which this is looking more and more like Richard Nixon's early 1970s with every passing day. Is anybody really shocked that Trump may have committed crimes or obstruction to cover up crimes or obstruction? And once again, we find ourselves pulling out Occam's razor. Occam's razor more really meant to be applied to scientific assertions than the political or cultural, but I think it still applies. Either Trump is lying to cover up corruption, okay, or we have a Purple Heart military veteran who happens to be a Ukrainian double agent spy who's involved in one of the most incredible cover-ups ever to cover up the fact that he is actually a spy and is making false claims under oath about what he saw in relation to that July 25 phone call. Hard to say which is more likely. Oh, well, Trump constantly tries to cover up his wrongdoing and distract or suppress it. So I know for me which is the most likely scenario. Unfortunately, seems like for many Trumpists, they're having a hard time figuring out which is most likely. Occam's razor seems to have been completely thrown out the window as a concept for Trumpists as part of their package of weaponized ignorance and cognitive dissonance that has become basically their operational status quo in the Trump era. We previewed earlier this week that this might happen, and it sort of has. Donald Trump's one of his former national security advisors, John Bolton, one of the most disgusting neocon war hawks of the last 20 years, has been called to testify in the impeachment inquiry of Donald Trump next week. If Bolton shows up, and we'll talk about that, Bolton would be really the first major witness in this entire thing. And Bolton, as I've said before, is not a good guy. He was one of the architects of the Iraq War. He just loves a good old war for either regime change and or oil. He's a total hothead, but he believes in defending his values as he sees them. Now, they're not my values. They're probably not yours. And of course, is urging Bolton and others, just don't show up. No surprise. That's been their approach all along. Now, let me immediately give you what some are saying is bad news, but I don't actually think it is. Last night, John Bolton's attorney, and of course, if you worked for Trump, you probably need a lawyer right about now, and Bolton has one. Bolton's lawyer says that without a subpoena, John Bolton's not going to be there. And we might imagine that this is a suggestion that Bolton is not going to show up. I don't believe that that's the case. It is not uncommon in these situations that the potential witness will request a subpoena or say, I won't show up without one. Because if they show up voluntarily and say things that Trump or whoever take issue with, that is a very different scenario legally for Bolton than if he was subpoenaed to testify. So it is not uncommon that for their own protection from future potential reduction of liability from something like a civil suit or perjury, or, whatever it is that Trump might allege John Bolton engages in, it is not uncommon for Bolton to say, for someone in Bolton's position, rather, to say, I will only show up if I am subpoenaed. Here's the bottom line. If we can get Bolton to this committee, Bolton is a bloodthirsty and ruthless neocon whose political views I find absolutely disgusting. But that doesn't matter. I would not want Bolton as my public political enemy. And that indeed may be terrible for Donald Trump. This could get ugly in the best way very, very quickly. We live in extraordinarily strange times. I acknowledge that, where someone as depraved in his political beliefs as John Bolton might actually signal or be the catalyst for the start of what is ultimately maybe an attempt to right our democracy, which has been turned on its head by this administration. That phrase about politics makes strange bedfellows has become almost apocryphal at this point, but it seems particularly accurate right now. And if Bolton's going to be the catalyst for maybe starting to right the ship that is on its way down, then that's a good thing. And we should anxiously and positively await the testimony of John Bolton. I'll let you know as soon as I know whether he has been subpoenaed and whether he will indeed be there next week. Let's take a quick break. Give us a like on Facebook at facebook.com/David Pakman Show. After this, there is a tweet for everything. That is the meme that best applies to what we will discuss after this quick break.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Did you know you can get David Pakman Show stuff, whether you're looking for David Pakman Show coffee for your Chemex French press or espresso machine, or a t-shirt. It's all available on our website, shipping to anywhere in the world at davidpakman.com/gear. The Very Stable Genius t-shirt is popular. The If Ivanka Weren't My Daughter t-shirt is actually popular with kids of all ages. We've got sweatshirts and hoodies with Hatriot Mail designs, more than a dozen available colors. And did I also mention that there's coffee? Oh, and bumper stickers too, plus no bogus supplements. If you're looking for something to give you the strength to lift a school bus over your head or make you live to 200 years of age, you're not going to find it on our store. Check it all out, shipping anywhere in the world at davidpakman.com/gear. If you want a 15% discount, all members and patrons get a 15% discount code. Check out the store at davidpakman.com/gear. The David Pakman Show is now on Instagram at David Pakman Show. You can check out behind-the-scenes pictures, memes, shots of the studio, shots of what Pat does all day. Very, very concerning to a lot of people. All of that and more on the David Pakman Show Instagram account at David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
This is starting to sort of get repetitive, but I think it's still really important to do. We have a cycle that has become very common in modern American politics. The president makes a completely unrealistic promise. He then fails to deliver on that promise. Then he brags about the results, even though they fall short of his promise. Then we find out he criticized a Democratic operative, a politician, or prior president for the exact same result. This time it's Barack Obama over the GDP and Donald Trump's prediction of 4, 5, or even 6% GDP growth. Let me set it up for you and we'll get right into it. GDP is the gross domestic product. It's one of the main ways that we measure the size of our economy. There's a lot of debate over whether GDP is the right way to evaluate an economy, but putting that aside for now, this is the total value of all the stuff we produce and the services that we provide in a year. That's our GDP. During his campaign and after becoming president, Donald Trump was talking about we're going to have 3% GDP growth, 4% GDP growth, 5, even 6% GDP growth. Here's just one example of Donald Trump doing this. This one's during his presidency. He's been predicting it since he was just candidate Trump.
But to get it going the way I really want, where we have GDP getting up to 4, 5, and even 6%, because I think that's possible. If you look back in your notes, you'll say when I said 4%, people said that would be years. Well, it's turned out that I'm right, because without the hurricanes, this last quarter we would have hit 4%.
So, of course, none of this has happened. And yesterday we learned that in the third quarter of this year, the GDP was just 1.9%. Now, it's actually pretty normal. That's a relatively normal level of GDP growth. It's not particularly good or particularly bad. But the thing is, Donald Trump is now cheering it as if it is a signal of the best economy ever, literally tweeting yesterday, quote, the greatest economy in American history. But back in 2012, when Barack Obama had the exact same 1.9% GDP growth, what did Donald Trump tweet? Because there's a tweet for everything. Donald Trump tweeted, Q1 GDP has just been revised down to 1.9%. The economy is in deep trouble. And of course it wasn't. But if it was, then Trump's economy must likewise be in deep trouble on the basis of those same GDP numbers. So this is one more of Donald Trump's insane predictions and his distortions and his being the pot that calls the kettle black. But this is also economically disastrous, and I'm going to tell you why. Remember, Donald Trump, when he told us about his tax cut plan, was told that's going to blow up the deficit. It doesn't balance. It's going to explode the deficit. And Donald Trump said, no, no, no. This tax cut plan is going to cause such growth. We're going to cause, 3%, 4%, 5%, 6% GDP growth, that the growth will pay for the tax cuts in a way that none of the analysts are coming clean with you about. The proposal for tax cuts was scored, and it was a train wreck, totally underwater, hugely deficit exploding, but his acolytes repeated this claim. They said the estimates are wrong. GDP will be up, 5, 6%. It'll pay for the tax cuts in total. Now, aside from whether that makes sense at all, and I would argue it doesn't, It's what he claimed, and it is not happening. And his followers are falling for it. We were told the GDP will go up so much that the tax cuts will be paid for and everything is going to be so good. Everybody will win. It's just winning for everybody. And instead, the opposite has happened. And we are now curating, or maybe there's a better way of saying it, Trumpism is curating one of the lowest information electorates that actually thrives on Trump lies and is energized by the distortions which they can then go and repeat all over the internet and Twitter and the normal enclaves, applying no critical analysis whatsoever, either because they're choosing not to apply any critical analysis or because they lack the intellectual capacity and knowledge of critical thinking and epistemology that might be required to do that analysis of what Donald Trump is telling them. But it is hugely damaging to the economy. It's hugely damaging to the fabric of the country in terms of just basic intellectual rigor and thinking. And it has opened the door for this to become the absolute new normal in future presidencies, in future campaigns, where promises don't matter. Any failed promise by the person on your, quote, team is either because someone is misstating what the promise was, or because of the other party that got in the way, or because of it doesn't even matter what it is. We'll excuse it in some way, shape, or form. The left does this to some degree. It's not as bad, but I don't want to do it. And if you see me doing it, then I hope you will call me out for applying a different standard to the left than the right. One of my priorities, and I think I'm doing an okay job of it, is when the same criticism could apply to both parties, I apply it to both parties. When there are differences between the parties, I point out what they are. And when the status quo is either implicitly or explicitly reinforced by both parties, because it's more of an establishment versus anti-establishment thing, I hope that I'm pointing that out to you as well. If I'm falling short of that goal, I do want you to let me know. There is a really, really crazy Christian Trumpist named Rick Wiles. We've covered him before on the show. Some of the things we've covered are Rick Wiles saying that vegan burgers are a satanic plot to destroy people's souls. He has said that Muslims have taken over America. Hard to imagine, aren't they? Like 0.6% of the population. Some kind of numerology conspiracy proves that Barack Obama is responsible for the death of Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia. He previously said somebody's going to die due to gay marriage. Rick Wiles has said that Jews will use red flag laws to take guns from Christians and then kill them. This is truly a religious nut lunatic of the highest order. He is now saying, actually, what we've all been predicting for a long time. If Donald Trump is removed from office, even through constitutional, legal, proper means, like impeachment, there will be violence. This is a Trumpist saying there will be violence from Trumpists if Trump is removed. Yeah, Rick, we know. Take a look at the clip.
If they take him out, there's going to be violence in America. That's all there is to it.
And when we say take him out,
however he leaves, there's going to be violence in America. And I believe there are people in this country, veterans, there are cowboys, mountain men, guys that know how to fight. Okay? And they're going to make a decision that the people that did this to Donald Trump are not going to get away with it. And they're going to hunt him down. I'm serious. They're going to hunt him down. I don't want it to happen. I don't want to see the country go this way. But once hell breaks loose, if these people in Washington think that they're going to get away with it, it's not going to happen. The Trump supporters are going to hunt them down.
Veterans, cowboys, and mountain men who know how to fight, and they will be violent if Donald Trump is removed. Look at the victimology language. The people who do this to Donald Trump, you mean hold them accountable in accordance with the Constitution? Right. The people who do this to Donald Trump will be hunted down by Trumpists with guns who might be veterans or cowboys or mountain men. This is sadly maybe the only time Rick Wiles has made a correct analysis of something that I can think of. He's right. I've said this, and I will actually go even further. I believe that if Donald Trump simply loses the 2020 election, forget about impeachment, forget about the 25th Amendment, forget about any of that stuff. If Donald Trump loses the 2020 reelection campaign and claims that there was voter fraud or fake voters or people voting illegally or whatever, which he will likely do, I think even in that case, Trumpists become violent. Donald Trump has successfully weaponized ignorance in a way that no recent president has done. George W. Bush did it to some degree, but it was nothing compared to what has been done right now. And one of the outcomes of that weaponization of ignorance will be that Trump's followers will quickly turn to violence in exactly the way Rick Wiles is saying they will. This is an unfortunate reality. It's a reality of the political and cultural status quo in which we live, which has been escalated by Donald Trump's rhetoric. The one semi-good argument I've heard about gun ownership is, does the left really want the violent right to have all the guns? We need to get guns too to defend ourselves from the right. Now, of course, in the real world, would more guns really solve the issue? It's dubious reasoning, as we've exposed before, but it is reasoning that I often hear from pro-gun owners, pro-gun ownership leftists, which is the right is really violent. And they may get very much more violent if Donald Trump loses or is removed. Don't we need guns to protect ourselves? Don't we need guns to protect ourselves? Let me know what you think either by replying to this YouTube clip or sending me a tweet at dpacman on Twitter. The question is, how concerned about violence are you, either around a Trump defeat in 2020, around removal via some other means, whether it's impeachment or the 25th Amendment or Trump choosing to resign to avoid impeachment or whatever scenario we are talking about? What is your sense of the risk of violence that exists? I've actually had, I guess I can say, I've had some conversations with individuals associated with law enforcement about this issue, and it is not an unfamiliar concern, at least to the folks that I've spoken to, the potential real physical violence that could happen if Donald Trump, I'm trying to figure out the right way to say it, does not remain president beyond January of 2021, because that could account for removal or simply losing an election that he claims was unfair. Let me know what you think. I do want to hear from you. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Here's a voicemail with an interesting little prediction about what will happen to this show if Donald Trump loses. I've talked before about, listen, there's no question. I think Trump is terrible for the country and the world. But our show is bigger today thanks to Trump being the president than Hillary. Had Hillary been the president, I don't believe independent media, this is not just my show, would have seen nearly the growth that we've seen since November of 2016. That's a reality. I still want the guy to lose because he's terrible for the country. Here's a different type of prediction about what Trump's loss would lead to for the David Pakman Show.
Hello, David. This is Dave from California. And I just want to tell you what exactly is going to happen. The House will vote to impeach. The Senate will not be able to get a conviction, so the president will not get thrown out because of impeachment. We're going to have to vote him out. Then, if we're lucky enough to vote him out, I don't think you're going to have your radio show anymore because as soon as they vote him out, I think he might get hired by Fox News to replace Shepard Smith. Thus, the end of the David Pakman Show.
Yeah. I don't see that happening at any time. I can't even imagine. I was going to say I would be last on the list to replace Shep Smith on Fox News. I don't even think I'm on any list that exists for doing anything on Fox News. Particularly, remember, the last time I was supposed to be on Fox News, I took a lift over to the satellite studio. Nobody was there. I called and was told, oh, nobody told you that Fox canceled this several hours ago. No, nobody told me. And that's the last I ever heard from them, and they've not invited me back on since. And it was quite a fiasco. So in any case, no, I don't see any plan for that. I don't see any path to that whatsoever. We have a great bonus show planned for you today. If you're satisfied with what you've seen from us today so far, then forget about the bonus show. If you want more today, instead of waiting until tomorrow, become a member or a patron at patreon.com/David Pakman Show or joinpakman.com, because on the bonus show, we will be talking about Barack Obama said something very interesting. Barack Obama said, Democrats don't always need to be politically woke, and tweeting stuff on Twitter is not really activism. Very interesting comments. We will also talk about a girlfriend charged in the death of a Boston College student after telling him hundreds of times to kill himself, according to prosecutors. A very disturbing but legally interesting case. And we will talk about the California fires. Warnings for Los Angeles are progressing north. A former TV director of the David Pakman Show, Natan Pakman, having to work from home as a result of these fires. He lives in LA. Can you imagine? All of those stories and more on the bonus show. I'll see you then.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Welcome, everybody. This is the Select Board meeting for October 15th, 2019. And we know that the meeting has been properly warned. Jan told us so at 4:30 when we convened for an executive session. So the first order of business is to approve the minutes of October 1. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. David has moved to approve the minutes from October 1. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And that's 4-0 in favor. I am unexpectedly chair, so I didn't have any prepared remarks, but I do want to say that I, for one, am very excited that the Brattleboro Colonels are 7-0. It's been quite a few years, so I think we should congratulate the team, and they're doing quite well. It's very exciting.
And Coach Pacheco.
And the coach, of course. Yeah. Well, you can have your own remarks.
Sorry.
No kidding. Yeah, that's my only remark, and now we go to manager's comments.
Thank you. I have two. The first is that we had talked during the summer months about anticipating the possibility of a utilities-related special select board meeting in the second half of October.
Yeah.
We're still working on the long-range plan for a very major capital project, as you know, that's at the center of that conversation regarding the upgrade and or replacement of the water treatment plant at Pleasant Valley Road. And so we've got some more work we need to do around that and some of the related issues before we'll be ready to bring the information forward for that special meeting. So it'll be sometime in the months ahead. We'll have a better update for you as we get closer to actually having all that material together. But we wanted folks to know that it won't be happening this month. What will be happening this month was we talked last time about the leaf pickup. The leaf pickup has now been scheduled, and so the 2 Fridays on which leaves will be collected throughout the community. This means all residents, all streets, everybody in the curbside program on the same days. Friday, October 25th will be the first leaf pickup, and Friday, November 8th will be the second and final leaf pickup for the year. Reminder that there's no plastic bags allowed for that. There's those special large brown paper bags. Those are available at local businesses, and those are the only bags in which people should be putting the collected leaves. October 25th and November 8th.
And they should be out by 7 a.m. on the curb.
On the curb by 7 a.m., Jan is reminding me. If you put them out later than that on those particular Fridays, you might be disappointed. You might be early in the route.
Although they might not disappear right at 7 a.m.
Right. That's true.
It's just to be safe.
It's the whole town in one day, so it's a long run.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that, Peter. I know the leaves tend to fall whenever they darn please, so it's sometimes tough to guess exactly when we should make those days. So we now have item 5, which is select board comments and committee reports. Are there any select board members that have any of those?
No new reports?
No? Yeah. Okay, so we now get to public participation. And just a reminder, this is true public participation where you can speak to any subject that is not on our agenda later tonight. And please keep your comments civil and under 2 minutes if you can manage it. Anyone? Tim? And please just state your name for the...
Tim Maysale, Brattleboro.
Thank you.
First, I'd like to congratulate the Colonels on doing so well, 7-0 on natural grass. And I'd like to remind everybody that tomorrow there's a very important school board meeting at 6 p.m. at the middle school. So
Dummerston School.
Pardon me?
It's at the Dummerston School.
Thank you, David.
Middle
Dummerston
Road.
School. So I hope a lot of people can attend that. It's an important meeting. Because the topic is they're going to discuss the proposal to install artificial turf for $1.1 million plus a lot more versus a natural grass solution to the problems that BUHS is facing with access to fields.
Thank you, Tim. Anyone else? Right there.
Hi, Dale Joy. For a couple of weeks, I've been dancing around the state trying to get information about why we are not alerting our communities about fentanyl deaths. Since this whole last year, actually 100% of the deaths have been fentanyl poisoning. went to the state. They told me to go to the town, talk to Jan. She told me to go to the health officer. So far, there has been 4 people died in 1 week of fentanyl poisoning here in this town, and it was kept quiet. The thing is they need to, every time somebody dies of fentanyl poisoning, they need to alert the community. These people with drug addiction have a attention span a lot shorter than average. They're scared to death of this, but they think the next batch coming in might be what they're used to. They have a chance with being given warnings. There is no more just heroin. It is fentanyl, and it is gonna kill you. We need that in our own town, not just Burlington doing it. We need to do it here.
Thank you, Dale. I might just want to make a comment that opioid deaths are reported, but I don't think it goes into the detail of fentanyl versus other causes.
It depends on the circumstance.
Yeah.
It depends on where the death occurs. And there's a variety of factors related to whether it might be reported as a death at the hospital or a death,
yep,
in rescue, or a death at the police department or the fire department.
They cannot even do that.
Well, we can't.
It's best, yeah.
Dale, we can't really get into a conversation about something that hasn't been warned. Although we do have a conversation later about opioids litigation.
That's different, yeah.
Certainly, but I just didn't want people to think that it is not my impression that anything is being swept under the rug.
It is mine.
Okay, that's fair. Anyone else with public comment? No? Terrific. So we do not have any business as liquor commissioners or water and sewer commissioners tonight. So we're going to proceed with something that's in the unfinished business category. And that is a previous discussion on municipal broadband that we kicked off at our last meeting. And I think town staff would like to report a little bit more in that area.
Thank you. So, yes, the board had requested some time back that staff do thorough research into what other communities had done in addressing the desire for better broadband services in their communities, what options might be available to the town. Patrick Moreland was the lead staff person on that effort, and over an extended period of time developed quite a volume of information that he distilled down into a report of about 10 pages or so that was presented in the materials for last month's meeting, or for the October 1st meeting. And he made a thorough presentation of that information at the October 1st meeting. There was then quite a robust conversation among the board members and involving members of the community. And at the end of that, the board asked that staff bring additional information that would sort of frame the context in which you might make sort of the next step decisions. And so that's what we've attempted to do here. Patrick has prepared an updated memorandum. He'll go through it here in a moment. We hope to be providing you the context that you need to decide how to proceed.
Excellent, thank you. So, as Peter noted, this is a continuation of the discussion started 2 weeks ago. The purpose of the memo, which was included in your backup, was to help to identify some sort of core issues that might spark a discussion and help the board to identify what its goals might be for investment in broadband infrastructure at a municipal level, and then hopefully to identify some options that the board can consider for what steps to take next. In terms of goals, I think one of the things that sparked this entire investigation really was net neutrality. And I'm pretty happy to report that in all of the instances that we've examined, any of the municipal broadband projects, the issue of net neutrality has been managed. That is to say that in each of the examples, they have been able to build a municipal fiber network that was delivering net neutral services to its customers. So if we were to pursue a project, I think it's safe to say that we could preserve and ensure net neutrality for the citizens of Brattleboro. That's I think, a done deal. Some other things to consider is the goal of the town acting in this arena to provide an equal level of service to all locations in town, right? Currently, today, that isn't the case. But, you know, you may want to ask yourself, is my objective to ensure that, you know, out on Kelly Road or out on, you know, up at the top of Sunset Lake or out in the furthest reaches of Western Brattleboro, is it important for us to have the same level of service there that's available on Main Street? If that is, then that leads towards a project which is funded by general obligation bonding, because that's really the only way in which to ensure that you build out a network where everybody receives the same level of service. If you're required to use revenue bonds, you may not be able to demonstrate the same level of aggregated market demand. So, you know, you may end up with some really exceptional service over here, but not so much over there. So if your objective, one of the things you may want to consider is it your goal to have everybody have sort of service equity? Something for you to consider. Alternatively, is your objective to see to it that really high-speed, high-quality services are available in the urban downtown, with the idea being that if we see to it that this service is delivered equitably across all locations in Brattleboro, then maybe we're going against our position against sprawl, because maybe we're enabling folks to live out in the further reaches and make it more comfortable. And so you may want to ask yourself, you know, are we trying to see enhanced and improved development in the urban compact, so to speak, or are we trying to see equity? A couple of things for the board to consider. And then one of the things is, you know, is our objective to lower the cost of internet service. And you could see from the memo and the discussion we had 2 weeks ago, municipal fiber programs don't necessarily produce dramatically more affordable services. Some do, some don't. If affordability is a primary concern, then again, a project with that is funded with general obligation bonds may be to the board's liking. The model in Leverett, of course, is the classic example. They've got gigabit level network going to every location in town. They're paying $23 a month for that. Of course, their property taxes went up, but for the users of the service, it's relatively affordable. And you know, the degree to which, for example, landlords pass that cost on directly to their tenants remains to be seen, but it's just something for the board to consider. Is affordability really a motivating factor? In terms of where do we go from here, the next steps are pretty straightforward, I would think. Not included here is, of course, do nothing, but we start with a series of action steps ranging from relatively limited engagement to very bold and decisive action, and I'll sort of walk through them one at a time. The first one, starting out on the more limited scale, is to continue to participate in the ongoing regional discussions around a communication union district. These have already been sparked. There are our sister and brother communities across the Windham region are going to start meeting relatively soon. I believe the Windham Regional Commission is going to be playing an important role in this. I think they're looking to bring down some technical assistance from Central Vermont to help generate a discussion and to help each member community to identify, you know, is this a good positive step for my town? And I think while a communications union district is not likely to be an immediate solution for any perceived problems in Brattleboro, there may also be no downside. So it's a type of thing where, you know, we can be supportive of our regional neighbors. We can be we can participate without any real liability. And you never know with issues like this. Things could change in a couple of years, and our participation in the district could be the solution that we just don't see today. But so staff would recommend continuing to participate in this and keeping the board up to date. Again, there's I see little downside to this. There's little liability, just some time to attend some meetings, at least at this point. The second step really goes to the heart of the general obligation bonding. As noted 2 weeks ago, Vermont municipalities are currently forbidden from using general obligation bonds for communication plant. That wasn't always the case, but it certainly is the case today. However, the legislature right now is investigating whether or not there should be changes to this, and there are some state officials that are currently investigating it. The Secretary of Administration, the State Treasurer, and the Executive Director for the Bond Bank. If the board believed that municipalities ought to have the right to use this tool if they wish to, then perhaps today or now is the time to let these people know our feelings on this subject, and perhaps we should communicate our thoughts on the subject to them in an effort to see if we can get some legislative fix. So number two, we could do if the board was interested in doing that, and we could do it also at the same time as we do number one. So really no downside there. Number three, we start to get into more decisive action. This would include items 1 and 2, but it would also include setting aside a sum of $60,000 in the capital program for fiscal 21 for the purpose of hiring a consultant to begin to map out a network design and to advise us on the optimum legal structure and manner in which we should go about building a general obligation funded municipal broadband plan. And again, that could be done in coordination with the first two, but essentially this one amounts to we should put some money in the budget for a general obligation bond funded project. Number 4 is altogether different. Number 4 is saying that we should put some money in the budget, but not for a general obligation funded project, rather for a revenue bond funded project. This is slightly more expensive than the last choice. This one is estimated to be about $80,000. And the reason for the additional expense is it's just a good deal more complicated to plan for a revenue bond funded project. You know, with a general obligation bond, we need to convince ourselves as a community that this is what we wish to do, right? We need to go to representative town meeting. We need to decide as a community, this is our objective. We have it within our means, let's do it. With a revenue bond funded project, we need to not just persuade ourselves, but we need to persuade investors that this is the best place where your finances are going to earn the most interest, or be the safest investment. So the focus has really got to be much more on aggregating market demand and on having a persuasive and convincing business plan for the resulting entity. If the board wanted to pursue this, I would suggest we could put $80,000 into the fiscal 21 capital budget. And the last and perhaps most bold and decisive move would be to proceed with that $80,000 today, using $80,000 currently not assigned for that purpose in the fiscal 20 general fund budget. Staff doesn't recommend this option. This would be an unbudgeted expense, and in a year where we've already had some unbudgeted expenses. But if the board wished to pursue it and wished to act immediately, this would be an option available. And I'm happy to take any questions or step out of the way and let the discussion begin.
Thank you, Patrick. Excellent list of choices. Yep. I'm sure we have questions beyond that. How would the board like to proceed? Do you think I should take some public comment first, or would you like to just bandy it about and then go to the public?
Let's do the bandying part.
Bandying.
That's our,
David,
traditionally we do that, yeah.
It feels to me like you have something
I do,
to
but
say.
I don't have to go. I have some questions and then some things to say. I don't have to go first.
I'll go first because I haven't.
Yeah, you're always
thus
on
far. Yeah.
I try to avoid the down the line thing.
Yeah, no, it's
That's
fine.
not my-
Yeah, we don't need to do it like that. But I just want to kind of put it out there that I don't really have super strong feelings about this. It doesn't feel to me like an urgent priority. I guess the things that I do have strong feelings about, I'm not super excited about the idea of a revenue bond, and therefore I wouldn't go down the road of a feasibility study looking at revenue bonds. When we looked at the material that Patrick provided last time, it seemed to me that if you go down that road, you don't really end up with a service that is more affordable for folks. Maybe I'm wrong, correct me if I am, please. So, yeah, I don't feel like, given where we are as a town right now, this is an urgent need. And I just want to kind of put that out there as a marker, and you all can convince me otherwise, but that's where I am right now.
Great.
Let's go to David, come back to you.
Okay. Patrick, on number 4, where you say down at the bottom, we should expect the study would recommend a project scope that falls short of equal service for every property in town. Is that your expectation because it's a business plan and they wouldn't recommend going for high cost extensions, or is that part of this process that guarantees that has to happen?
I think the reasoning behind caution there is that we haven't performed the feasibility, so it's entirely logically possible that every section of town could present adequate demand for a new service. But it's also entirely possible that, you find a couple of places over here and you find a couple of places over there. These folks seem to be satisfied with what they have today. And so in the end, what you might end up with is some improved services to some locations in town, but more or less the same thing as we have currently in other portions of town.
Right. Yeah, so then I wanted to get to the goals because that addresses one of the goals. And to me, equal access is absolutely crucial. If it's going to be a municipal system, it has to be available to everyone. I think the concerns about the urban compact, although I understand the ideas behind that and support them, it's also, we're kind of limited in terms of how much we can expand in the urban area. And for a telecommunication like your business, that could easily be done out at the end of any Meadowbrook or any of the roads in town, and would be possible out there if that were there. Also, are we trying to lower monthly service charge? Yes, that definitely is the goal, but I think more importantly is to provide a competitive communications infrastructure for the whole community. I mean, it's great to lower the cost to everybody, but I think it's much more important to have something that's really going to promote economic and growth in other areas as well. I think continuing to participate in the community or communications district is a good idea. I think it's important to recognize that that's going to be a very slow process, and there's no certainty that anything will come of it. And one of the drawbacks of doing that is that it's going to rely a lot on legislative action, but I think more importantly is that we as a town and as the largest entity in the union, we wouldn't really have any control over what happened or the rate it happened or how it happened. And we've had issues with the waste district where that came to a head, and we had some very difficult conversations, very difficult votes, and a lot of divisiveness, and half the county is still pissed at us for taking away their recycling bins, which is the way it's viewed. And the school district is also seeing additional costs to Brown Brook taxpayers beyond what they would otherwise be paying because of the school merger. So there's not a great track record for doing this that focuses on the needs of the economic hub community, which we're trying to make the point, or trying to identify and make people understand that we have very different requirements than the surrounding towns. So those are all, you know, goal-related and structure-related things. I think lobbying for general obligation bond obviously would be a good idea. I think the putting a, we're going to obviously going to talk more about this, but putting an item, putting an amount into the budget for a feasibility study, and it would be an estimate no matter what we went forward with, is what we did in terms of hiring a human resources person. We put the money in the budget in anticipation of wanting to take action. It's what we did with the sustainability coordinator. It's also what we did with the diversity training. We've had the funding for that in the budget. Now this is the third year, and this year we're going to spend it. So it's not unusual to put things, although a lot of people do complain about it, it's not unusual to put things in the budget that we might not wind up spending or might not spend in that allotted amount of time. I think, though, I'd like to address some of what Daniel said about not being really excited about or not seeing the, I can't remember your word, but not being
that it didn't feel like an urgent thing.
Yeah, it doesn't feel urgent. Yeah, I think. I mean, last time I talked about the economic promise and a lot of the other possibility and the promise that fiber holds, but there are also health and mental health and family, health, mental health, elder care, family health issues and equity issues that it addresses, which are, I think, really crucial. So I'd like to read another, just a page and a half, and again, give credit to Susan Crawford and her book Fiber for most of these insights. So in terms of health issues, here are some examples. With fiber and really truly high-speed, high-quality internet, emergency medical teams could have a tablet with them that would enable a physician at the hospital to practically be with them in the ambulance. She could supervise the EMT procedures, ask the patient questions, access their medical records, check whether medication the EMTs have on hand can or should be given right away. She could review radiology and lab results that might exist for the patient, schedule scanning or surgery, and put people and resources in place while waiting for the ambulance to arrive. In the mental health field, and I don't want to really separate out the health, but we still do, I mean, it's all health, but we still do kind of separate these, so I'll continue to do that. Imagine the support that an isolated, anxious teenager would experience from having an opportunity to join a group of other students their age, talking several times a week with a skilled counselor, someone many miles away, or having individual sessions where the counselor can see every part of the student's facial expressions and body language. The student can see the care and respect in the eyes of the counselor and know they can trust him. In Chattanooga, they are already creating school clinics in the elementary schools. For families who don't have access to transportation to get basic medical care, these school clinics are serving them. These families already trust the school nurse and can find their way to school. Telemedicine in the schools can help school nurses serve as care coordinators, and we have to start viewing health as part of our community infrastructure. Elder care will include higher quality access, allowing home care providers to check in easily and see and talk to and get a really good reading on the people they're providing the care for and relieve some of the isolation and anxiety with a brief televisit. And the promise in equity issues, this is really I think the biggest thing, particularly for this community. Inadequate, unequal connectivity increases and strengthens existing patterns of inequality. Poorer, rural, elderly, and disabled residents are far less likely to have high-speed internet at home, just as they were less likely to have electricity 100 years ago. This has enormous consequences on their ability to lead a thriving life. Wilson, North Carolina, created a municipal fiber system and is offering 50 meg symmetrical fiber service to all public housing units and apartments for $10 a month. Certified nursing assistants in Wilson are able to expand their careers by earning additional certification in medical technology, phlebotomy, reading EKGs, and other areas that enhance their professional careers. They don't have to go to the library to complete homework assignments, and the community colleges now offer management software because of this fiber connection. Chattanooga's commitment to fiber has met their this is more economic. When people are isolated without transportation and fast internet, or live in rural areas, they can't apply for a job online, or have access to their birth certificate, or apply for a passport, or pay their taxes online. And this is wrong. So fiber is a precondition for economic growth and sustainability. And if we don't develop a municipal fiber system, we'll become an economic backwater. It's the job of the public, not private companies, to address the intertwined problems of public education, healthcare, workforce development, inequality, affordable housing, and transportation. A public option for telecommunication will mean lower cost, world-class services, and opportunities for all citizens. The fiber line provided by a neutral player would be open to all service providers on equal terms. Dark fiber, which is the passive, just the fiber itself, not the services or any of the light, the information going through it, could be leased to telecom operators, businesses, local government, individuals, anyone that needed and wanted high-quality internet connectivity. A wholesale leasing model or a cooperative model are both viable and are in existence in large and small communities. Another option is to issue an RFP for companies willing to operate an open access fiber network. Over time, this network will support everything this community wants to do. The steady revenue generated by this infrastructure will continue for years after the initial costs are recovered. Patrick mentioned the $23, I think, in Leverett, is it? Yeah. That $23 goes to pay those bonds. Steady, reliable returns of 4 to 5% can be expected for a long time, and maintenance costs are low, perhaps 40% lower than the cost of copper. Ultimately, fiber is a public good. It will take time to pay for itself, but so does a sewer plant or a highway. It will facilitate rapid growth of innovation in transportation, energy, healthcare, manufacturing, education, job training, disability access, augmented and virtual reality, government services, and public safety, and will keep our living standards rising. It's basic infrastructure for a good life.
If you don't mind, I think Patrick wanted to...
Yeah, I just wanted to make a clarifying point. That $23 and change that was the monthly recurring fee in Leverett goes to pay for the operations of the network. It does not cover the cost of paying for the bonds to build.
Right.
So, one of the reasons why it's so doggone affordable.
Thanks. Do you want to chime in?
I do. Again, thank you, Patrick. This is really helpful to lead our discussion. My goal would be to preserve net neutrality as the foremost goal. But I'm cautioned because with the recent federal court case, it is now up to the state to see if we can have our own statewide net neutrality. And I would be pleased to see what the state does with that task before them before we barrel ahead and say it's Brattleboro's #1 goal. Let's see what the state can do. I am not a big proponent of equal access to every place in Brattleboro. And my view of that equity issue is a little bit different because I view it as a very expensive proposition. And I understand from the Leverett case that while the individual rates may be low, the increase to taxes for providing the system is enormous. And Leverett was a very different type of community than Brattleboro, and we need to keep that in mind. And what I like to guard against is, while something may benefit everyone in town, the cost of it is borne precipitously by the middle class. And I think that type of equity is something that we need to keep foremost in our mind as we're being responsible to the taxpayers. I'm an urban compact kind of person, and I feel that having good service through the urban corridor and at the library would address many of the concerns that people have for, school children and so forth. So, again, what I think that we should do now is which isn't in your list, Patrick, is see what the state does about net neutrality, number one. And then your number one in participating in these regional discussions. I appreciate David's concern about the whole hub issue, because Brattleboro always gets the burden that our surrounding communities don't have. But to be in the loop with these discussions as they go forward, I think is prudent for us to do and easy. Lobbying for the use of general obligation bonds is just a thing that we should pursue regardless of whether we use it for this or not. And funding of any kind at this point, I don't think is prudent, or the time has not come.
I guess it's my turn. David, I had a question to clarify something you talked about, and I know it's someone else's words, I think, but they were talking about access in an ambulance situation, in emergency situations. How would that work with a locked fiber line? Are you speaking to build it out to a Wi-Fi situation?
Well, in order, primarily the physician would have immediate access to that stuff. The connection to the ambulance wouldn't really necessarily require fiber connection. That would be a wireless connection. They'd have to have a radio signal transmitter, much as they do, or radio communication, much as they have right now. But so that's really all I can say. I mean, the book anticipates 5G connectivity, which I'm not necessarily. We'll see where that goes or how that plays out. But part of this is to not get stuck with 5G, which is going to be controlled by. I'm going to get on a tangent, so I'll be really brief. It's going to be controlled by large corporations and is not ever going to get out to the surrounding areas, and necessitates the installation of these. They call them small cells, I think, but they're actually very wide, and they have to be just 100 or so feet apart. And just for comparison, when Comcast went to 4G, they had to install 30,000 across all of their service areas. Something like 30,000 new, I don't know what the right word is, but something to transmit or to boost the signal. It's more like 5 million if they're going to provide 5G, because it's a high frequency radio, not a low frequency radio, a lower frequency like 4G is. So that's a whole different bunch of technology.
Yeah,
so I can't really.
The reason I threw that out there is some of what you said did strike me as some of the promise of 5G that I've heard about, which I've spoken with our legislature's representatives, and it's pretty far away for Vermont. And as you point out,
the fight is going to be ugly when it becomes close.
Yeah, and I think it's going to have sort of that last mile effect with the commerce.
It'll never have a last mile.
Right.
It's way too expensive.
But what those words also sort of reminded me that some of this conversation has not been had, that is sort of surrounding conversations like municipal Wi-Fi, providing Wi-Fi signal within the downtown compact at least, or perhaps even all of Brattleboro. Those are things that some people have mentioned to me that unfortunately we have not yet talked about in this situation, which I think would be quite good to have Brattleboro Wi-Fi that was, free or affordable or however.
I believe that the town of Wilmington uses some of their money from their 1% local options sales tax to fund their downtown Wi-Fi service.
And I believe
putting it out there.
I believe Brattleboro
went.
There was a company that went down that road and it folded. I believe this was right when quite a few years ago. But anyway, it wasn't a municipal situation. So that's sort of, I hate to pile on more questions to the already complex discussion we're going to have. But my point in doing that, from my own perspective, is that we also haven't really talked about our deficiencies in cell service, which I would be a little bit more interested in broaching and working on before I started to feel like we had a public mandate to connect everybody with wonderful Wi-Fi at incredible speeds all across the entirety of Brattleboro, you know, with equity for everyone. Because it does, I do fall into the compact camp, I would say, to encourage people to stay compact within your community and to discourage sprawl. You mentioned that my business could be out at the far end of Bonnievale or whatever. But I made a conscious decision to live downtown so that I would have access to pretty good speeds on the internet, so because I need my upload speeds, as I mentioned last time. And I'm not sure that's a bad thing. And I'm not sure all of our residents who live out in the woods and who pay taxes really want what we're talking about here. I'm not convinced of that yet.
We haven't talked about it all or asked them. I mean, that's part of this work is to find out what people want.
Absolutely. And this has kind of gone along a little fast. I've done a little bit of talking to people, and I've put some stuff out on social media. I have to say that the response is a little bit tepid compared with when I talk about our opioid crisis that we're going to talk about later today, or even things like downtown buildings being renovated, you know, down on Flat Street. Much more excitement in areas like that. Not scientific, you know, survey at all or anything like that. But I just want to say that I don't feel a lot of our residents are really chomping at the bit for this subject matter at the moment. It could be that people have other priorities, as Daniel.
Can I ask you a question about that? About one of the things you said. Sure. Yeah. About you deciding to come downtown because of the high-speed access which you need for your business.
I would say stay downtown.
Stay downtown, yeah. If that access were available, if you were moving into town now and that access were available pretty much anywhere in town, I mean, if you were coming to town, where would you come to live downtown, or where would you locate your business in the core? I mean, where is there available space, or where is there a place for you to live?
There's properties turning over all the time downtown. Is that what you mean? Is there not?
Well, yeah, I mean, we've got, well, I don't see a lot of for sale signs around. I don't see a lot of turnover properties. We have empty storefronts, but it's...
well, we have a new building going up on Flat Street. These things don't happen quickly, but they go up steadily. And that's what we're trying to encourage by densifying, if you will, our downtown. That is a more earth-friendly approach to take, I think. And I think, personally, that's all part of the decision. If I know that if I move way out into the woods near the outskirts, I know that I'm going to spend more money on gasoline. I know that I'm going to need a powered bicycle, perhaps, or something that's efficient that'll get me in and out. Whereas right now, I can walk to every service and store that I need. So it's a similar situation, I think, when it comes to decisions about high-speed internet.
But your septic goes into a septic system, and you've got a wood lot out there to cut down your carbon footprint. So there's arguments on both sides.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that's my point, is that I would like the community, like, I think for us it means representative town meeting. I'd like to have a conversation about this, to put it in either in an article or put it in the budget, and have town meeting talk about it and get a sense of the community. And a feasibility study, particularly the one, the revenue bond one, where you actually, part of the study is to go out and ask people, would you, if we were going to give you 100 up, 100 down, would you invest in this? Would you launch this? Would you accept this? And to go to all, you know, to go to all around the community and ascertain the interest and the willingness of people to support it. Because if it's a municipal system, people would lease access to the system. And if internet providers would lease access to it, they would send us money. Individuals would lease access to it, we'd take it to the front of their house, and they'd run in the wire into their house, and they would pay us whatever the fee turned out to be over one period of time. It would be a municipal system. So there have to be customers, clearly.
Speaking of reading the participation, getting the thoughts of our public. We have some public here now.
Good segue.
So I think it sounds like a good segue to go to public participation on this matter. And Tim has his hand up first, just barely.
And the matter is, should we go ahead with a feasibility study, or are we interested in municipal broadband? Or is it?
know yet.
I think, thank you for that reminder that we will try to keep this within the bounds of at least municipal broadband discussion and not currently go into cell signals or Wi-Fi signals. We're just going to try to keep it containable. And
Well, you did broach the.
I did.
The cell and the 5G, so I think you have to expect some response to that. Get the taste of what's coming.
Hey, Tim.
Hi. Speaking as a taxpayer, property owner, middle-class member of the public, this is one of the most forward-thinking proposals I've heard from the select board in a long time. I don't know. I'm very excited by this.
I want to say more forward-thinking than banning plastic bags. We were the first in the state to do that.
That's history.
At your urging.
He wants what's next. Don't worry.
Okay.
Copper wire, as I understand it, was installed mainly for the transmission of voice. We have come so far beyond that. One thing that we can be assured, in the future, we're going to need more broadband. We know that. My understanding that fiber optics can transmit 1 gigabyte per second is tremendously more efficient. We haven't talked about security. Fiber optics is much more secure. You can't tap into a copper wire with fiber optics. I believe from all I've read that it's cheaper in the long run. And this gets to one of the main points that David addressed. With the income inequality that we know is so bad in our society, comes a digital divide. There are people who remain behind because they haven't got access to the internet, and this would address that. It would make it more accessible for the hospital, for certainly public access to computers, for job training and job searches through the library. Certainly schools would benefit from this. Beyond the balance sheet, there's really important social reasons to go ahead with this. And as a taxpayer, I would be so all for it. So, thank you.
Ricky, did you want to? You did? Okay. Right there.
Dan Foster, Putney, and the sole reason I came is to voice support for fiber optic and not wireless broadband. I have a sensitivity to wireless signals that I developed 6 or 8 months ago. And the only time I've traveled to Montpelier to testify about anything was to testify about how that's affected my life. I come to Brattleboro a lot less often than I used to do business. I'm more interested in seeing Wi-Fi free areas versus free Wi-Fi. And I think internet access is really important, but we need to remember that wireless signals can have an impact on people's health. And we're a lot more than just biochemistry, we're bioelectric beings. That's why a pacemaker works to support somebody's heart. And there is a lot of evidence to support that there's cross signaling with wireless electronics and our own electrical system. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
I have to agree with him. I've had to shut my computer down so many times because I have developed a sensitivity to Wi-Fi. And with the scientific studies out there, do we want to be responsible as a town if we go with any kind of Wi-Fi for the lawsuits over cancer? That is already evident in our science community. It's too bad it's not evident in just our community.
Thank you. Does anyone else, just a reminder, we're trying to keep it to municipal broadband.
Franz Reichsman, District 2. We keep hearing about feasibility studies, which to me is a little bit of a vague term, because is it feasible technologically? Well, certainly. What I think we're really talking about is the economic impact and the cost. And that's what the economic impact on the plus side could be very important. The cost on the minus side could be exorbitant, but nothing that we've seen so far has any numbers in it. There's no basis for comparison so far. And so if you're talking about a feasibility study, I think we need some numerical data that would tell us what are the likely costs of different options, and also, very importantly, what are the predictable economic benefits of having a system like this, whether it's in the downtown area or it's every place in town. Until we have some data, or at least some decent estimates of the actual numerical values of these unknowns, it's just going to be a question of words going back and forth with no basis for a real decision. Thank you.
I'll take a few more, or did you want to?
Yeah, I was kind of wondering whether Patrick wanted to weigh in there, because I felt like in the packet that we had last time around, it sort of described the cost of building the systems in these various communities, and I don't know if you've seen that or not.
The costs that are in it, let's call them estimates that are in here, are based on discussions with other communities that have undertaken similar projects, right? And so those costs would help us to understand, what the network design is going to look like, help us to identify, what's the appropriate model. Are we going to build it ourselves? Are we going to contract for it to be built? Are we going to manage it ourselves? Are we going to have somebody else do that? Help us work through some of these issues, including setting up what's the level of service we're seeking to achieve, et cetera. Nowhere in this memo or in the previous memo does it begin to tackle the issue of what would be either the economic benefit of doing so, or what would be the opportunity lost for not doing so. That really wasn't the scope that was asked of staff initially. It was, in essence, what have some other communities done, and at least in the work that's been performed so far, there's been no effort to, provide a convincing argument for why we should do this. That's been outside the scope of what's been researched. Really, it's more been a focus on if we knew this is what we wanted to do, what do we do next? And I think what we do next is pretty clear. We need some technical assistance.
I think Liz, and then maybe we'll go back to our...
So, Patrick, there's an opportunity for us to get some of those answers without funding a feasibility study by participating in the Communication Union District, would you say?
I think participating in the district would potentially provide us some, if nothing else, some reduced cost in understanding a revenue bond funded project, because we would be doing it in partnership with our other local communities. So there could be a cost savings to be had by examining a network for, call it, a dozen towns rather than just doing it ourselves.
And so it is an opportunity to just explore the topic without funding a study.
Certainly the opportunity to learn more. When last we were meeting about this, the Wyndham Regional Commission was going to begin holding meetings. They were going to be working with the Vermont Department of Public Service, likely bringing down some technical assistance out of EC Fiber to help, bring some knowledge into the region to keep everybody informed as to how they could proceed. So, we could benefit from participation in that process.
The purpose of those communications unions district is to make sure that towns have improved access to good internet, right? And when you described the one in central Vermont, that left a hole in the donut, right?
It left a
Which was
hole in the donut for the populated areas, right?
Right.
Montpelier and White River.
So the analog would be Brattleboro.
And
As usual.
that was made really clear in the meeting in Wilmington a couple of weeks back when the gentleman from the Public Service Board said, you know, likely Brattleboro would be the hole in the donut. So.
Right.
I think it's also true that the legislation and the grants are for rural areas. We're not really, I mean, we only have a couple of places where we could apply for those grants. It wouldn't amount, and that's the $60,000 grant from the state. They're not thinking about places like us, and they're not thinking about everybody.
Right.
You know, they're thinking about, well, I don't know what they're thinking about.
But that's because we have a certain amount of service now, and the rural areas do not.
Right.
So
Well, we have
there's a reason for
95%.
that.
Technically, on the low end of broadband, we have 95% coverage.
And I'm tempted to say something myself, but I want to be a good chair and throw it back. Anyone else who has not spoken needs to say their piece.
Yes, I'm Donald Saff. I'm a teacher and artist in town. I too am really glad that David has brought this up, and I think it's like one of the most forward-thinking topics that you guys are talking about. It's great. I think that fiber optics is like, it's like electricity. It's like telephones, and we're going to need it for the future. And we need it for everybody, not just for downtown. You know, you keep talking about sprawl, but what does that mean? I don't see a lot of sprawl. There's a lot of people living rural lives. There's a lot of beautiful farmhouses. I mean, can you say, like, we have to have everybody in Brattleboro and you can't live in Dummerston? I mean, there's a lot of people who live out in the woods who came to Vermont because that's what they want to do. And that doesn't mean that they don't have a high-tech lifestyle. They still need fiber optics. And, you know, lastly, I think that you don't want to talk about wireless, but that is an important issue because fiber optics is a completely safe way to have this technology. And so that's an issue. It's something we're going to find out more about in the future because there's been 3 of us so far who have had problems with Wi-Fi. And it's real. So thank you.
Anything additional to add there? No, we'll go with someone who hasn't spoken, if you don't mind, Dale.
Yeah, thank you. This is Derek Jordan, and I'm a local musician. I live in Dummerston, but I spend a lot of time in Brattleboro. And I just want to say just 2 quick points. Is